I'm behind you.
Okay, so do the nullifier. That was a big bounce.
That was weird.
That was very weird. For the first time since closed beta, the Riot Shield has become the center of attention in the finals. We have seen a sharp increase in the number of people complaining about the Riot Shield, especially in the subreddit. Many of these posts argue that the Riot has become overpowered, claiming that it wins too often in 1v1s, has an unfair advantage in encounters, and is able to block bullets way outside of where the shield is showing up. But this raises the question, how did the Riot Shield all of a sudden become a problem? Is it because of the 7.6 update changes? Well, as a melee main for the past 4 consecutive seasons, as well as a level 8 Riot Shield user, allow me to take us through what led to this change and critically examine how the Riot Shield actually works. This seems to be the common sentiment being shared online regarding run-ins with Riot Shield. A player runs into a room, sees a Riot user on the other side, starts shooting at them, watches the Riot Shield run towards them while blocking most of their bullets, and then is whacked to death once the distance is closed. What often makes this scenario frustrating for some players, beyond a growing confusion about how to counter it, is the feeling that more of their bullets should have hit, especially when watching the footage in slow motion. Now, we will address this specific criticism head-on in a little bit, but for now, let's see what changed that caused this uptick in Riot Shield complaints. To begin, we first need to look at what changed for the Riot Shield in Update 7.6. First, its hit sweep range was increased by around 50 centimeters, bringing it more in line with other melee weapons. Prior to this update, the swing attack of the Riot Shield couldn't break glass that the user was standing on because its range was so short. So now it is merely closer to similar melee weapons, but it still has the shortest range of them all. Second, it increased the lifetime of the hit sweep from 40 milliseconds to 120 milliseconds. This is the actual damage dealing part of the attack animation. Now, 40 milliseconds is extremely short, the shortest hit sweep of all the melee weapons, so its increase to 120 milliseconds was justified, now making it slightly longer than that of the dagger's hit sweep. Third, it increased the outer width of the hit sweeps by 70%. This means that the horizontal range of the Riot Shield attack is brought more in line with other melee weapons' swing attack area. Fourth, it decreased the inner width of the hit sweep. This is a very minor change that can, if anything, slightly hurt Riot Shield. But this change was made to all melee weapons in the game, and most likely will yield next to no discernible difference for most players. And fifth, the duration of its attack was decreased from 0.9 seconds to 0.81 seconds. This is the real notable buff to Riot Shield, and this, in conjunction with the hit sweep duration increase, definitely makes the Riot Shield a bit more forgiving to use. An attack that lasts nearly a full second that only deals damage in the last 0.04 seconds is understandably punishing, which is why it was so rarely used prior to 7.6. That being said, these changes are nowhere near large enough to account for the influx of Riot users in the last few weeks. No, the bigger reason for this increase in Riot players is the new limited time game mode, Cash Ball. Oh, our stupid teammate got in the way. Oh! The same pattern emerged during the last limited time game mode, Heavy Hitters, resulting in a rise in sledge users. That one was a bit less noticeable though, because sledge users were not that uncommon to begin with, and counters to them are much more obvious and more widely known. To begin, let's highlight the weaknesses of melee weapons in general in the finals. The most obvious weakness is the fact that they cannot deal any meaningful damage at range. Please take advantage of this. Trying to 1v1 a melee user within melee range is setting yourself up for failure. You will not beat a sledgehammer while standing within 2 meters of them. Stop trying. If a melee user gets too close to you, run. Cover some ground, reset, and try again. If they continue to pursue, then you might be pressured into confronting them. But most of the time, they will acknowledge their shortcomings and reset as well. Secondly, teammates are your friends. If you 2v1 a single Riot user, you will win nearly 100% of the time, assuming you don't bunch up shoulder to shoulder. A Riot Shield can only absorb bullets from a singular direction, so if you flank even 60 degrees from your teammate, the Riot user will be forced to retreat or die in the process. Teaming up with your teammates is the single most effective way to shut down every Riot user, hit registration issues notwithstanding. And thirdly, any AoE damage dealer, or anything that does tick damage, is, at worst, a very good deterrent against Riot Shield. One benefit that ranged weapons have is that they do not need to cover distance in order to deal damage. The Riot Shield offers no such advantage. So, simply tossing a pyro or gas grenade, or planting some mines will make good Riot users second guess that direct approach. And the ones who aren't persuaded will now be at half health and much easier to take down. Fourthly, there are a few specific gadgets and specializations that completely shut down even the best Riot Shield users. Nullifier and Lockbolt buy you some time to reposition. Gravity Vortex and Anti-Gravity Cube destroy any semblance of control the Riot user might have had. The shield does not cover underneath the player, even when they look down, meaning once the Riot user is above you, they are completely exposed. Jump Pad can also yield the same effect. Goo Gun is another extremely effective way to counter Riot Shield. Since the range of the baton is so short, if the Riot user is trapped in goo, they are unable to reach players outside of the goo, even if said players are standing right next to the Riot user, meaning the Riot user is essentially neutered. Even more advanced play, like using Guardian Turret to force Riot Shield users to face a certain direction when entering and traversing through a room, can be used to combat Riot to an impressive degree. And lastly, there are also certain weapon types that directly counter Riot Shield. The most obvious one is Flamethrower, as it inflicts lasting AoE damage that the shield is incapable of blocking. Grenade launchers like CL-40 and MGL-32 have also proven to directly shut down Riot, as these projectiles cannot be blocked with the shield. Also, every single melee weapon is a pretty good counter for Riot Shield, as the Riot has the shortest range in its attack, even shorter than the Humble Dagger. Melee like Spear and Sword have significantly better range. Melee such as Dagger and Sword and Dual Blades have a much faster swing attack, and melee such as Dagger and Sledge have an incredibly hard-hitting attack compared to the Riot Shield. Also, while the Riot Shield is technically capable of blocking melee attacks, it is extremely inconsistent in doing so, as the melee attack is not cancelled when it collides with the shield, meaning if the attack makes it through or around the shield at any point throughout the damage portion of its attack, it will successfully deal the damage despite having been blocked earlier in the swing. This is where even the Dual Blades outshines the Riot Shield, as it is capable of fully and consistently blocking the Riot Shield's attacks, an ability that is not mutually shared. Given all of this information, it becomes very apparent that the Riot Shield is far from uncounterable. Of course, the Riot Shield will require a different strategy to counter than other more common weapons. This is true of most melee weapons. People complained about an inability to counter the Sledge before its untimely demise, despite the fact that Sledge is arguably the most vulnerable weapon in the entire game. The truth is that, even with all of these counter options at your disposal, you don't really even need to utilize any of these to successfully destroy a Riot Shield user. You simply need to stick together as a team and spread out when you encounter one. Despite all of this, everything I've said thus far does not address the largest aspect of Riot Shield that a majority of people have been complaining about. That being the hit registration anomalies. So, let's address it. Riot Shield is a notoriously confusing weapon, both to utilize and to confront. The actual location of the shield is not always where you'd think it would be, which is where a lot of this confusion is stemming from. Now, to be clear, this is not a new issue. It has been this way since its inception. The increase in server desync is partially to blame, but the other half of the story has existed for the Riot's entire life. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here I am with the Riot Shield. If I stand like this to block the shots fired at me, I will successfully block the incoming bullets. This angle looks broken, but if you look at it from a third-person perspective, it looks perfectly fine. This is part of the design of the Riot Shield. This is what makes using the Riot Shield so difficult. It will feel incredibly inconsistent and wonky until you get a feel for where the shield actually is and learn to not rely on visual cues. But these inconsistencies don't just stop with the user. It also exists for those observing from the outside. And this is where the problem lies. This is more difficult to demonstrate as it is somewhat random and dependent on server connection. Hit registration is complicated, and the shield highlights this in a way that no other object in the game does. This will often manifest when a player observes a Riot user in a manually constructed animation, while the Riot user is actually turned at an angle to protect their body for as long as possible. For example, when a good Riot user attacks an opponent, they will be angled left for as long as possible before flicking back right to connect their swing. This is done to protect themselves from being shot by their target throughout their attack animation. However, from their opponent's perspective, the Riot user had their front fully exposed during that entire swing. Now this situation, including its severity, frequency, and nature, are affected and influenced by a variety of factors, including but not limited to server connection, server desync, hit registration errors, object mesh and object hitbox mismatch, inaccurate or misleading character animations, etc. Unfortunately, not all of these issues are easy to fix. Most of them are probably very hard and very complicated. Yes, it is unfair. It isn't fun to fight against a player whose animations and meshes don't always match up with their hitboxes. Any disparity between one's perceived state, the visible model and animation, and actual state, hitbox location and logic, negatively impacts players' trust in game mechanics and undermines competitive integrity. And, as a melee main and avid Riot Shield user, this is a very stressful situation to be in. Because all I see around me are people demanding a nerf, when, in reality, the nerf will merely shove the problem out of sight and silence the users of that weapon, all the while not even addressing or solving the problem at hand. This is the collective fear of us melee mains, because we've seen it before with the sword. Embark nerfed the sword for an entire season, over 100 days, before finding a solution. A solution that many sword mains are not happy with. The sword was obsolete throughout that entire time. I don't want to see the same happen with the Riot Shield. The one thing justifying a sword nerf was the fact that it was so overtly oppressive. A nerf was needed, just not one that severe. But the same isn't true for the Riot Shield. Riot is not that oppressive. It requires a coordinated team to be remotely effective. It is somewhat slow and clunky, and it is completely shut down with good team synergy. The Riot Shield needs adjusted for sure, but a major nerf is not a valid solution. Nonetheless, it is important to remember that these issues are not new. They have been here since the official launch of the finals. They are just becoming more clear. Hopefully, there are some remedies that Embark can cook up that will help mitigate this frustration when fighting against Riot Shield, as faulty or misleading visuals can feel exceedingly unfair. But the Riot Shield is not the root problem. It is merely a victim of the other attributes that the game possesses. A nerf to the Riot Shield will only diminish its already niche usefulness, and that still won't solve your problem. Instead, this matter ought to be faced head-on. Not all of these issues will be able to be solved. This much is obvious to those with some experience in digital simulation and game engineering, like myself. That being said, there are some changes and reworks that could happen, given enough time, that could help remediate these obstacles. My advice? Let Embark cook. In the 7.9 update released just a couple days ago, the devs fixed a specific case in which the Riot's Shield hitbox would desync from the player animation, and they note that more attention and potential solutions will be implemented in the near future. Give them some time to properly address this issue, and, in the meantime, take advantage of the myriad of ways to hard counter Riot Shield. Remember, this doesn't have to be a permanent solution. You simply have to outlast the influence of the catchball minigame. Give it a month, and I guarantee you that most of the Riot Shield frustrations will have dissipated. Test me. And thanks for watching.